Hello and welcome to Audiobook Reviews. In this video, I will be discussing An Echo of Things to Come, the second book in the Licanius Trilogy by James Islington. Now, I mentioned in the last video for the first book, The Shadow of What Was Lost, that this series definitely messed up my whole to-read list because after reading the first book, I immediately went out and got the next two because I felt I really wanted to finish this. And I was really excited when I saw the third book in the trilogy had come out late last year, so I actually could get the whole complete story, which, as anybody who reads fantasy knows, waiting for a series to be finished can often be very grating. So I was really happy to get moving on it. Now, the first book left off with kind of that the battle is won, but the war is just beginning. We're specifically kind of told that was practically nothing. That was just this very minute fraction of our kind of unseen enemy strength, and there is so much worse that can come next. So it really sets up for book two to kind of jump into the bigger picture. This series in general so far, it's this way in the first book, and it definitely has continued in the second book. It weaves a lot of different elements in. You have your kind of main story going on. You have quite a lot of flashbacks. You have flash forwards because you have characters who can see the future. And so it's really a lot of moving parts. And I'm still extremely, extremely impressed with how well Islington is managing to keep it all coherent. And you get some payoffs for little things in the first book as well. And we've definitely kind of doubled down on the whole idea of time travel as well. So that's something that we've gotten to see. We already knew it was possible, although it's very difficult to actually use. But this book kind of explains some of the out of place moments. And this book seems to really focus more so, in my opinion, on Caden. We found out who Caden was in the last book, and we really get to see him coming into his own a bit more. He gets a lot of his memories back, and a lot of his passages start where he goes somewhere and it triggers a memory, and we learn more and more about him, and really getting him set up to do some of the important things. There was a plot line in this book that I did not at all think was actually going to be resolved in book two. I was very surprised that it was resolved that involved Caden, and it kind of went in and didn't seem to do a whole lot. It was really important to the story, but I'm wondering if there's going to be more to it as well. And on that note, there were some things in this book that definitely, I think, were kind of just meh, for lack of a better term with it. And I think there were a few things I mentioned on the first book that I think can be chalked up to a newer author. And Islington, like I said, has done a fantastic job with the way he's done this, but there are some things he falls into. In the first book, I commented there were a few scenes that just seemed almost reused. It was characters just stopping to have a conversation, and they felt like they hadn't been able to do that in a while. We get a little bit more of that kind of thrown in here with An Echo of Things to Come, but honestly, the thing that I disliked the most was how the relationships were handled. We kind of had the seeds of different relationships started in the first book. Well, we had Davian and Asha. That was the very first one we were kind of shown when they were even still at the Tall. And we later see or Torin and his desire to have a relationship as well with Thesia. And then we have the Princess Caroline and Caden, and that was kind of just thrown in as well. But the theme with all these different relationships was that you feel like they want to be together, but they just can't for some reason. And then we see little by little the couples and get moments where they just sit and just talk. That's the greatest thing. And it just felt a little bit repetitive with the way that those were handled. It was similar to the conversations part in the first book. So there definitely are a little bit of repetitive things there. And then otherwise, I feel like for book two, there's still a lot of character development lacking. And that's something that there were, like I said, definitely some things I kind of looked past in the first book. I really enjoyed it. In book two, I definitely noticed a little bit more. And some of the characters don't seem to be growing a ton. There are a couple of huge exceptions, one being Caden, who his character growth is very much a focus. And we get to see a bit more specifically with some of the other characters. We find out more about them, but a lot of people, we don't get a really in-depth look. Now, to be fair, I did just get done reading more Joe Abercrombie, and nobody does characters as good as him in my reading experience. So maybe I'm being a little bit hard on these books, but that's what I've seen a little bit happening there. The overall story, though, is once again just kind of crazy with all of the action, all of the things going on, and the way that it's weaved together. And this is still an exceptionally fun book to read. I still most certainly want to read the final book, and I'm really wondering how a lot of it is going to tie up and end because there are still so many things. I'm kind of half expecting a time jump at this point for the third book because we've seen some events that happen very much in the future. So will we get to that or will it all become wound in? I'm definitely very curious. Book two in general as well, the ending I thought was very satisfying and it called back to some things in the first book in a really satisfying way, in a really unexpected way. Islington continues to there are definitely like the kind of the twists, but so much of it still it feels like he's really built to them. So they're not always hugely surprising. They still feel like they make sense, but then he'll do that and he'll throw in a couple of big things as well, just to make sure you're still at least a little bit surprised. Now, I do want to get into some spoilers here because there are some things that I really liked and really did not like that are definite spoilers for this book. So I am going to get into a spoiler section. If you want to skip past this section, definitely check the description and you can skip forward to the end where I'll kind of go back and summarize from there. With that, though, I am going to get started into spoilers. So, there was a lot of things that were kind of explained here. One of the big ones I do want to specifically mention because I thought it was a very cool concept and it was kind of what I had been expecting. I was starting to think like there's got to be something to it, not necessarily to the effect exactly, but book two did a really nice job of slowly giving you more and more information on the shadows, kind of where that came from, and in general, where the entire shift of the augurs out of power came from. And the shadows, I had started to think there has to be something where they still have like access to the reserve, but they can't use their power and it's being sapped somehow. And that ended up being very much the case where the whole modern, at least, existence of shadows is designed to give power to, at the time, Nethgala and then later Asha. And that was really interesting. But just seeing that you had Nethgala working with one of the augurs and literally the entire driving force behind the coup that had the royalty take over, that had rules put on the gifted, that had the augurs killed, and all of it just to help Caden's plan. And we also see Caden actually really remember his plan, and we get to really see what the whole idea was. So we learn a ton more about Caden through those things, see that this entire thing was so much time in the making where he very specifically set all these things into motion, created the boundary, was planning on closing the rift, freeing the Lith to get Licanius, and the fact that basically his plan was to kill all the other Venerate, kill all the augurs, anyone who can access Khan so that he can close the rift, and that includes himself. So that was very interesting, and we'd seen bits and pieces there where that kind of made sense as that's what would probably have to happen. And I had suspected there was more involvement, but just the way that it was set up, or these huge events being set into motion, very interesting. On the same note, we got to see that Shamaloth, who's still pretending to be El for most of the Venerate, had set up all these different motions over thousands of years as well, including getting Dylanus to be built and having the kind of the machine there that even opens the rift, all that done, and just the way all these little things are set up is just fantastic. Very enjoyable in general. And like I said, to the ending where you actually see future Davian go to Diana's right as Caden is first getting there, and their interaction, and then seeing Caden straight up kill Davian, and it was his skull that was over the gate that his younger self then sees, and just that whole scene, that was a fantastic way to end the book. Very unexpected, makes sense, throws back to him obviously having to have met Caden before because he, well, not given him the ring. That's what we were told, that he'd given him the ring. And then the whole kind of awkward interaction between them when they meet, when young Davian is pulled back in time into Delanus. It was just, that scene was awesome. I really enjoyed it quite a lot. And the ending there, it made me really excited to see what more is going to happen. What are they really going to find out? And there's still so many unanswered questions, but it left me in a really excited place. Now, the thing I really was not a huge fan of, and that I didn't want to get into until we were in the spoiler section, was, once again, it kind of had to do with relationships, but specifically with character death or lack thereof. So, in general, I mentioned the relationships and how it was all kind of it's just not going to work out. But you had Davian, who was just in the mode of, well, I only want Asha, even though we've been friends, but we've never really had any sort of intimacy or romance involved. And Asha feels the same way. And you had both her and we're both just like, all these people are interested in them, but they're only interested in someone else. It's a little repetitive, but Davian very specifically was kind of given a potential love interest with Michelle, and that just sort of went nowhere. And I think that was the plan, but I really felt like that could have been handled differently. And that was part two, where it seemed to be almost a continuity issue, where she had explained her feelings to Davian. And granted, it was while Rohan was kind of controlling people, so maybe he just disregarded it because he thought it wasn't true, but he seemed wholly unaware of that later on. So that was a little bit confusing. But it comes up, it brings a scene where he once again is talking about Asha. She's upset. She walks off and gets attacked by the Elatai, which I'm probably mispronouncing, and nearly dies, but then doesn't. So right off the bat, granted, she does end up being very important, so I see why, of course, she didn't die. But that would have been a really interesting situation. He would have felt very responsible, and it would have played well into the character. But then I can understand that one, because once again, she plays a very important part later. And then, coming up after that, you have the attack by Ciliar. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right either, but her attack on the palace because she's trying to find Caden, and she knows that he had been there. And there's a lot that happens there. But kind of the big thing I wanted to note is that Wur's younger sister is injured, and it appears that she also might die. Once again, she ends up being fine. And we're kind of left with, oh, it might happen. And it's just, when you do this, and there was a third that I'm going to get to, but when you keep doing this where a character almost dies and then doesn't, it just really takes away the stakes of 10 characters die. And we haven't really seen any of our main characters seem to be too worried about that. We've seen characters die, but usually lesser import characters. I think especially here, though, Wur's younger sister dying would have accomplished quite a lot. He's the one who made it so that she could come to the palace at all. He felt responsible. It would have killed him inside, and it would have given his mother all kind of firepower with the administration, because he'd feel guilty. The administrations were coming after him, and he'd feel like, hey, maybe they're right. And it just would have added more of a dynamic there. I think would have worked really well. And then when we got to the third, where Asha, which we kind of knew wasn't going to die anyway, but when she's falling from a great height, once again, it's like, now we've already done this. This is 3 for 3. There's no way anything's going to happen. But it would have maybe given a little bit more tension, because we just saw, albeit a secondary character, die. I just think that could have been done a little differently. So, this might be one of those with the third book, all bets are off, but we'll definitely have to see. That was just something, though, that felt like it just pulled some tension really away. Overall, though, like I said, this was an extremely enjoyable book. There definitely are some kind of hints at Islington being a newer author, just the way that things are handled, and I think he definitely can improve on the way that he writes characters and just taking out some of the repetition in scenes. But his plot is fantastic. It is really difficult, and I just can't stress enough. I know I've said it, but it's really difficult to write not only your plot and tie in flashbacks and then tie in visions of the future and then tie in time travel. There's so much going on, and you have to keep the story very tight and very precise to have it work. And he has done a fantastic job doing it, especially being a newer author. I'm very impressed. I expected there to be a lot more plot holes in general. On the note of plot holes, I will say too, I was waiting for some sort of explanation on how the boundary in general, which from the map and from mentions seemed to be a wall. I'm like, oh, why don't they just sail around it or like go over it or something like that? That was something that was potentially a big plot hole. It is explained the boundary is a dome around basically that whole part of a continent. So I forgot to mention that earlier, but that I was very happy to see. And the boundary does play a lot of import in the story as well. But so we do see that it is actually a dome, and there's a reason for that. But really, we see a ton happen with this book, advancing the story, learning more about the ancient sides, learning more about the motivations of the Venerate and their characters in general, and seeing our heroes kind of be forced to jump up to something they don't really feel they're ready for and just blindly go in and try to help. It seems there's going to be a lot happening in the third book, and the way this book ends off definitely sets the stage very, very well. So I know I'm excited. I assume if you've watched both of these reviews too, that there's probably not much of a question of you reading book 3, but I definitely think this book was enjoyable, definitely still worth the read, and I'm still going to move directly on to book 3 so that I can finish this story and the trilogy as a whole, because especially after the end of book 2, it has me very excited. That said, that was my review of An Echo of Things to Come. I will be moving on to book 3, of course, The Light of All That Falls, and that video will be coming out next Friday. I'm going to be doing a Wednesday video actually on the Venerate because this is just a really fascinating topic and something I want to talk more about. So if you enjoyed this video, watch out for the review on the next one and or the Venerate video. You can also watch, I posted another kind of headcanon video last week as well. So check out those if you've enjoyed the Licanius content. Feel free to give the video a like, and if you want to see more content like this, feel free to subscribe.